It's 7:14 in the morning. Your suit has been pressed since the night before. Your shoes have been polished to a mirror shine. Your hat is set at exactly the right angle. Not too rakish, not too stiff. You haven't left the house yet, but the workday has already begun. You check yourself one final time in the hallway mirror, not out of vanity, but out of discipline. Because in 1950s America, the way a man presented himself before he walked out the door was the first decision he made for his career that day. In 1950s America, being a businessman wasn't just a job. It was a performance, a code, and a calling. And every man who wanted to succeed knew it. The post-war economic boom had created something entirely new. A vast, humming corporate world full of men in identical suits, climbing identical ladders, all following a set of rules that nobody posted on a bulletin board and nobody needed to explain. You either understood them or you didn't. And if you didn't, the consequences were quiet, invisible, and permanent. But nobody ever wrote these rules down. Nobody had to. If you're new here, we uncover the forgotten codes and hidden rules of mid-century life every single week. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss one. And if you enjoy today's video, a like helps more people find it. Now, let's get into it. The 1950s American businessman is one of the most iconic figures in modern history. The gray flannel suit, the leather briefcase, the firm handshake, the corner office with the view. We think we know him. We've seen him in the films, the advertisements, and the television shows that turned his world into mythology. But behind that polished exterior was an entire system of unspoken expectations. Rules about how he dressed, how he spoke, how he ate, how he carried himself in the elevator, how he treated the people above him and the people below him. Rules that governed every single hour of his working life. Break them, and your career quietly stalls. Nobody told you why. Nobody called you into a meeting to explain. You simply stopped being invited to certain lunches. Your name stopped appearing on certain memos. Doors closed that had once been open. Follow them, and other doors opened. Doors that were never advertised, never listed, never explained. Today, we're going back to the boardrooms, the bullpens, and the business lunches of post-war America to uncover the rules every 1950s businessman was expected to follow, whether anyone told him or not. Rule 1. The suit was not optional. The first rule of the 1950s business life was simple. You dressed for the job you wanted, not the job you had. In post-war corporate America, the suit was armor. It was a signal. It was a daily declaration of intent. A man's wardrobe communicated his ambition, his discipline, and his respect for the institution he served. Before he ever opened his mouth or shook a single hand, the standard was a dark suit, charcoal gray or navy, a crisp white dress shirt, and a conservative tie in a muted color or a subtle pattern. No loud prints, no novelty designs, nothing that drew the eye for the wrong reasons. The goal was not to stand out from the crowd. The goal was to look like someone who already belonged at the next level up. And the details mattered in ways that might seem extraordinary today. A fraying collar, a missing button, a tie that didn't quite reach the belt. These were noticed. By your manager, by his manager, by the clients who came through the office twice a year. A man who couldn't manage the details of his own appearance raised a quiet but damaging question in the minds of the people who mattered. If he can't manage this, what can he manage? Your suit was your first piece of work product every morning, and it was judged accordingly. Rule 2. You were always early, never just on time. In the 1950s office, punctuality was the baseline, and the baseline was not enough. Arriving exactly on time was considered borderline disrespectful by the standards of the era. Not overtly. Nobody would say anything directly, but the perception was there, quiet and persistent. A man who arrived at the stroke of 9 was a man doing the absolute minimum. No more, no less. The unspoken expectation was that an ambitious man would arrive early to the office, early to every meeting, early to client lunches, presentations, and any room where his presence would be evaluated. Arriving at 8:45, when the office opened at 9, said something. It said you were invested. It said you took the work seriously. It said you respected the time of the people around you enough to be ready before they arrived. The men who moved up fastest in post-war corporate America were frequently the ones already at their desks when the boss arrived in the morning, and still there, heads down, when he left at night. Nobody instructed them to do this. Nobody needed to. Rule 3. The handshake was a test. Every businessman of the era knew that the handshake was the first evaluation he received in any new relationship, and sometimes the only one that truly mattered. It had to be firm, not crushing. That was aggression performing as confidence, and experienced men could tell the difference immediately. But limp was far worse. A weak handshake in a 1950s boardroom could undo in 2 seconds what a perfectly pressed suit had spent all morning building. You made eye contact. You matched the other man's energy without trying to overpower it. You didn't pump too many times, and you didn't release too quickly. And then there were the rules within the rules. You never extended your hand to a senior executive before he extended his. You waited. That small pause, that beat of measured deference, it communicated that you understood the hierarchy, and that you respected it. The room noticed. It is always noticed. Rule 4. You never discussed your salary. Compensation was the great unspoken subject of the post-war office, and the rule around it was absolute. A man might spend 4 decades at the same company and never once reveal to a single colleague what he earned. To discuss your salary, even casually, even in general terms, was considered not just indiscreet, but actively self-destructive. It bred resentment among the men below you. It invited scrutiny from the men above you. And it marked you as someone who didn't understand how the game was played. The rule extended upward as well. You did not ask what your boss made. You did not speculate about it in conversation. You did not compare notes with peers over drinks after work. If you were seeking a raise, you requested a private meeting, made your case quietly and with appropriate deference, and accepted the outcome without theatrics. The negotiation happened behind closed doors, and stayed there. Money was discussed in hushed tones in the 1950s business culture, or it wasn't discussed at all. Rule 5. Lunch was never just lunch. The business lunch was one of the most carefully choreographed rituals of the 1950s corporate life, and it was governed by rules that had almost nothing to do with the food. The first rule was knowing where to eat. A man who took a client to the wrong restaurant, too loud, too casual, too inexpensive, made a statement about his judgment that no amount of charm could walk back. The right restaurant said you were a man who moved in the right circles and understood what those circles expected. The second rule was how you ordered. You never selected the most expensive item on the menu when someone else was paying. When you were paying, you made your guest feel comfortable, not observed. The third rule was the timing of business conversations. You did not raise the substantive matter immediately. There was a prescribed period of small talk first. Sports, family, current events, before anything of substance was discussed. Getting to business too quickly was considered aggressive. Getting to it too slowly was a waste of everyone's time. Reading that rhythm correctly was one of the most valuable skills a 1950s businessman could possess. The men who mastered it were frequently the men who closed the deals. Rule 6. Ambition was displayed quietly. Every man in a post-war office wanted to advance. That was understood and entirely expected. But the manner in which you displayed that ambition was subject to rules just as strict as anything governing your wardrobe or your handshake. Naked ambition. Pushing yourself forward in meetings. Speaking too much. Openly angling for the next promotion. This was considered unseemly. The man who made his hunger visible was considered less trustworthy than the man who kept it contained. The rule was to let your work speak first, and loudest. You volunteered for the difficult assignments others avoided. You took on the project nobody wanted and delivered it better than anyone expected. You made your superiors look good. consistently, reliably, without requiring acknowledgement. And then you waited. Not passively, but you waited for the recognition to come from above rather than demanding it from below. In 1950s corporate culture, patience wasn't a consolation prize for men without options. It was the strategy of men who understood how the system actually worked. Rule 7. The secretary was not to be underestimated. Every experienced businessman of the era understood something he would never say in a meeting. The executive secretary ran the office. She controlled access to the man at the top. She knew the schedules, the politics, the history of every professional relationship in the building. She knew who was in favor and who was quietly on his way out. Treat her poorly, impatiently, dismissively, and your meeting requests will find their way to the bottom of the pile. Your calls were returned slowly. The small frictions of office life somehow multiplied. Treat her with genuine respect. Learn her name, acknowledge her competence, say please and thank you, and mean it. And she became one of the most powerful allies in the building. The unspoken rule was one that the most successful men of the era understood intuitively. Real influence in any organization is rarely found only where the titles say it should be. Rule 8. Loyalty was the ultimate currency. In post-war corporate America, a man was expected to give his employer something that appeared in no contract and was mentioned in no job description. Loyalty, complete, sustained, and largely unquestioned loyalty. You did not move between companies frequently. Job hopping was viewed as evidence of either a difficult personality or a lack of staying power. The ideal was to join your company young, grow within its structure, earn your seniority, and build something over decades rather than years. You did not speak critically of the organization in public. You did not complain about leadership to your colleagues. You did not take grievances outside the building. The exchange was understood by both parties without ever being formalized. The company offered stability, a defined career path, and eventually a pension. In return, the man gave his working years, his discretion, and his willingness to put the institution ahead of himself. It was, in its way, a kind of marriage, and like all the marriages of that era, it rested on a foundation of expectations that were never fully spoken, but never once forgotten. Looking back at the rules that governed the 1950s businessman, it's easy to focus on the rigidity, the conformity, the hierarchy, the quiet, relentless pressure to perform a very specific version of success and never step outside its boundaries. But there's something else worth noticing: a clarity. A sense that the code, however demanding, gave men a map. You knew what was expected of you. You knew what success looked like. You knew the rules, even when no one said them out loud. And there was a kind of freedom in that knowledge, even if the freedom itself was narrow. The world those men navigated is largely gone. The gray flannel suit has given way to the open-collar startup. The 3-martini lunch has given way to the 6 in the morning cold brew meeting. The lifetime career at a single company has given way to the portfolio career across a dozen. But the unspoken rules? They never disappear. They don't retire. They simply change form, adopt a new language, wear different clothes. And the men who thrive in any era, in any industry, in any office, are almost always the ones who bother to learn them. If this resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed. We go deep into the forgotten codes and hidden rules of mid-century life every single week. And drop a comment below. Which of these rules do you think still holds up today? I read every single one.